In the history of mankind, there have been wars, which have been more than have dragged on for a century. In this centuries has become for both warring parties, many things can change over the course of time. Unexpected turn, new or different political interests, epidemics and diseases, or the mass deaths of people. Why have these wars dragged on for so long? It wasn't always the actual trigger of the war, intentional or politically planned. In this video today, I present you the longest wars in human history. Here we go. Number 1. The Punic War. This conflict lasted for 118 years. In the middle of the 3rd century BC, the Romans conquered almost all of Italy. In addition, the Roman Empire has several colonies established in the Mediterranean region. In the first stage of the Punic War, the Romans conquered Sicily. But on this at that time, richly stocked with raw materials island, where also the mighty Carthage strived for this island under their control. In addition, the geographic position of Sicily was very favorable situated for the opening of new trade routes with other states. This constant rivalry between Rome and Carthage should trigger 3 Punic Wars over the next few years. The 3 Punic Wars lasted with interruptions from 264 BC to 146 BC. The First Punic War lasts 23 years, and the trigger was the aspiration for dominance over Sicily. The Second Punic War lasted 17 years. The trigger was the conquest of the Spanish provinces, which were previously under the control of Rome, by the Carthaginian general Hannibal. The Third Punic War lasted 3 years. The purely military campaigns lasted for 43 years, but the conflict in that of large sum lasted 118 years between Rome and Carthage. Due to more reserves and soldiers and material, Rome emerged victorious from this conflict. Number 2. The 100 Years' War. This conflict lasted 116 years, from the year 1337 AD to 1453 AD. The 100-Year War has divided himself into 4 stages. Between these 4 stages, there was always a truce negotiated. The longest ceasefire was 10 years. The enemies in the 100 Years' War were England and France. The interests in this conflict were completely opposite. France wanted to end England's rule in northern France. England wanted to strengthen its position in France. The province of Flandrian was formerly under the protection of the French crown, but was dependent on England for its trade relations. The 100 Years' War was triggered in 1340 AD, when the English King Edward III proclaimed himself King of France, and invaded northern France with his troops. The turning point in the 100 Years' War comes after the execution of Jeanne d'Arc in 1431 AD. From this year, the 100-Year War turns in favor of France, with the complete expulsion of England from all French provinces. At this point, a strong national consciousness of France was established. On October 19, 1453 AD, the English army surrendered in Bordeaux. The French military established a professional army, and abolished chivalry, and used more infantry than cavalry. In addition, the first weapons used gunpowder. Number 3. The Greco-Persian War. This conflict has lasted for 50 years. This war lasted from 499 BC to 449 BC, and was divided into 2 or 3 stages. From the point of view of the Greek city-states, this war was a struggle for independence, and a defense against the Persian Empire. From Persia's point of view, this conflict was an extension of their great empire, and the opening to trade with the other Mediterranean peoples. The 300 Spartans, who fell to the Persian forces at Thermopylae, have gone down in legend. The turning point in the Greeks' favor came at the naval battle of Salamis. As a result, Persia withdrew from the Aegean, and recognized Greek independence states in Asia Minor. the civilization of the Greeks reached a new heyday. A civilization which should become the benchmark for the whole world in the next 1,000 years. Number 4. The English War of the Roses. The English War of the Roses was an English civil war in the 15th century AD. This conflict lasted from the year 1455 to 1485 AD, and was held by rival English noble houses of York and Lancaster. This war lasted 33 years. The two noble houses Lancaster and York went back to a descent from Edward III. Because of this, both houses derived their claim to the throne. One of the triggers for this conflict was England's defeat in the 100 Years' War. The reigning King of England Henry IV was defeated by France at the end of the 100 Years' War. The rival noble House of York exploited this weakness of the king, and himself laid claim to the English throne. The Duke of York, Richard, wanted to become the English king himself. After fierce fighting, the House of York was able to win in 1461 AD. In 1470 AD, the intervention of the French king turned things around. Henry IV was back in power. However, a year later, he was from the House of York executed, and Edward IV of the House of York was King of England until 1483. In 1485 the conflict was ended, when Henry Tudor, with the house who was related to Lancaster, became English king. To settle the dispute, he married the daughter of Edward IV of the House of York. Number 5. The 30 Years' War. The first conflict in human history in which several states in Europe were involved at the same time, and thus had the format of a continental European conflict. This war lasted from 1618 AD to 1648 AD. The enemies in this war were two alliances. The first party were the believers in the Christian Roman Catholic Church, and the second party were the believers in the Christian Protestant Church. On the Catholic side were southern states of the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, Portugal, Italy. On the Protestant side were the Reformed states Sweden, Denmark, Poland, and the northern states of the Holy Roman Empire, as well as France, and support from England. The Catholic Church was afraid of the spread of the Christian Protestant faith. The Protestant Church, on the other hand, aimed precisely for the spread. The trigger of this conflict was the fall of the Prague Window Inn. Prague was in Bohemia, a Protestantic state. But the ruler had been the Roman Catholic Emperor of the German Empire for years. After a number of Protestant churches in Bohemia were closed, the Protestant Bohemian nobles threw the Catholic rulers out of the window. This is how the conflict began. By the end of the 30 Years' War, the Holy Roman Empire had lost 2/3 of its population. The army of France had fallen 80,000 soldiers. Austria and Spain had more than 120,000 fallen soldiers. Number 6. The Vietnam War. This conflict lasted 18 years. The Second Indo-Chinese War, between Vietnam and the United States of America. One of the most devastating wars. In the second half of the 20th century the conflict lasted from 1957 to 1975. This war was divided into 3 periods. The first part was the South Vietnamese guerrilla war. The second part was the large-scale U.S. military intervention. In the third part the open conflict between the National People's Army, Vietnam and the USA. The parties to the conflict were North and South Vietnam. On the side of South Vietnam, the United States of America as an ally. On the side of North Vietnam were the Soviet Union as allies. As after the end of World War II, as the communists in China came to power, Ho Chi Minh became the leader of the communists in South Vietnam. The White House leadership faltered, fearing a domino effect. More countries around the world are transitioning to communism. After the assassination of U.S. President Kennedy and the Tonkin incident, the U.S. intervened in 1965, directly into the Vietnam conflict. The U.S. took part in the Vietnamese Civil War. The strategy was based on the principle of find and destroy. For this reason, an attempt was made with napalm bombs burned down the jungle completely. The North Vietnamese dug tunnels, and responded with a guerrilla war. That was it today, for the longest conflicts in human history. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. See you soon, your channel History Best.